There are people who walk away from their families and never explain themselves. No final argument, no dramatic goodbye. Just silence. And the world calls them cold, ungrateful, broken. But what if that silence is not weakness? What if it is the last act of self-preservation? What if walking away was not rebellion but survival? If you've ever felt torn between loyalty and sanity, stay with me. Subscribe quietly. This channel is for those who understand strength doesn't announce itself. Family is the first place where the human nervous system learns what safety means. Before language forms, before logic develops, the body records emotional patterns. Tone of voice, unpredictability, absence, control, warmth, coldness. These sensations shape the internal world long before memory can explain them. When people later cut off contact with their families, it is rarely sudden. It is the final outcome of a long internal erosion that began in childhood. Most families do not appear abusive on the surface. There are no visible scars, no obvious violence. Instead, there is emotional inconsistency. Love that is conditional, attention that must be earned, silence used as punishment, approval that feels fragile and easily withdrawn. The child learns quickly that harmony is maintained not through authenticity, but through adaptation. They become attentive to moods, careful with words, alert to shifts in emotional weather. This vigilance becomes their normal state. In such environments, the child does not learn how to express needs. They learn how to suppress them. Their emotional world becomes something to manage privately. Over time, this creates a split. Outward compliance, inward isolation. The child becomes capable, mature, responsible, praised for being strong. But inside, something essential remains unmet. Emotional attunement. Being seen without performing. Being loved without conditions. Carl Jung understood this early adaptation as the formation of the persona. A mask developed not for deception, but for survival. The persona is shaped by what is rewarded and what is punished. In families where emotional honesty is unsafe, the persona grows rigid. It becomes a defense against rejection. But defenses always carry a cost. The more the child abandons their authentic impulses to preserve connection, the further they drift from themselves. As adulthood approaches, the cost becomes clearer. Relationships feel draining. Boundaries feel dangerous. Guilt appears whenever separation is considered. The individual feels responsible for others' emotions, yet disconnected from their own. Family interactions activate the same old nervous system patterns. Tension without reason. Exhaustion after conversations. A feeling of shrinking when returning to familiar roles. At this stage, many people try harder. They communicate more. They explain. They forgive. They rationalize. They hope maturity will repair what childhood could not. But trauma does not respond to logic. The body remembers what the mind wants to forget. Each visit, each call, each emotional regression reinforces the same internal message. You are only acceptable when you abandon yourself. Cutting off contact does not begin as a desire to hurt. It begins as a question. Why do I feel worse after being around the people who are supposed to love me most? Why does my body tense before family gatherings? Why do I feel like a child again, small and invisible, even though I am grown? These questions are uncomfortable. They threaten loyalty. They challenge cultural myths about unconditional family bonds. So they are often ignored. But unanswered questions accumulate pressure. And pressure eventually seeks release. When contact is finally reduced or severed, it is not impulsive. It is the nervous system choosing stability over familiarity. It is the psyche attempting to heal in an environment where it is no longer required to perform emotional labor. The silence that follows is often mistaken for coldness. In reality, it is recovery. Society struggles to understand this because it equates proximity with love. But proximity without safety is not love. It is endurance, and endurance is not infinite. The human psyche can tolerate pain for years, but it cannot thrive within it. Those who walk away are not rejecting family. They are rejecting the version of themselves that only existed to maintain emotional balance for others. They are choosing to stop betraying their inner life for the sake of appearances. This choice is rarely celebrated. It is lonely, it is misunderstood, and it requires a strength that often goes unrecognized. Because the first bond that teaches you silence is also the hardest one to leave. When someone distances themselves from their family, the most powerful force pulling them back is not love. It is guilt. Guilt is the emotional glue that holds dysfunctional bonds together long after safety has disappeared. It operates quietly, disguising itself as morality, duty, gratitude, and loyalty. And because it feels noble, it is rarely questioned. From an early age, many children are taught that family is everything, that blood is sacred, that no matter what happens, you stay. These messages are not neutral. They condition the psyche to associate separation with betrayal. So when the adult child begins to feel overwhelmed, drained, or harmed by family dynamics, they do not interpret it as a signal to leave. They interpret it as personal failure. This is how the internal conflict begins. The nervous system signals danger, while the moral conditioning demands endurance. One voice says, "This hurts me." Another replies, "You owe them." Over time, this inner split becomes unbearable. The individual lives in a constant state of self-doubt, questioning their own perceptions, minimizing their pain, and rationalizing behavior that would be unacceptable from anyone else. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow as the part of the psyche that contains what we are not allowed to express. In families where anger, boundaries, or independence are discouraged, these impulses are pushed into the shadow. But what is repressed does not disappear. It accumulates. Resentment grows quietly beneath the surface, often turning inward as depression, anxiety, or chronic guilt. Loyalty, when weaponized, becomes a cage. The individual remains emotionally available, even when it costs them their health. They answer calls they dread. They attend gatherings that leave them hollow. They carry responsibility for moods they did not create. And each act of self-betrayal reinforces the belief that their needs are less important than the family system's stability. Many people mistake this pattern for kindness. It is not. It is conditioning. True loyalty does not require self-erasure. But in enmeshed families, individuality itself is perceived as a threat. When one person changes, the entire system destabilizes. And systems always resist change. This is why the first attempts at distance are often met with emotional backlash. Accusations of selfishness, dramatic expressions of hurt, sudden illnesses, silent treatment. These responses are not conscious cruelty. They are the system attempting to restore equilibrium. Guilt is deployed because it works. It activates the old fear of abandonment and rejection. At this stage, many people return. They apologize for boundaries. They explain themselves endlessly. They try to compromise. But compromise in a system that does not respect autonomy only delays the inevitable. The cost continues to rise. Emotional exhaustion deepens, and the realization slowly emerges that no amount of explanation will be enough. The most painful insight is this: being understood is not required for self-preservation. Waiting for permission to leave is a trap. Families that benefit from your silence will never grant you clarity. They will only grant you conditional acceptance. Cutting off contact, then, becomes an act of psychological separation. It is the moment when guilt is no longer allowed to override intuition. This does not mean the guilt disappears. In fact, it often intensifies at first. The individual feels cruel, ungrateful, broken, But beneath the guilt is something unfamiliar and fragile: relief. For the first time, the nervous system begins to calm. The constant anticipation of conflict fades. The body is no longer bracing. This calm can feel disorienting. Many people mistake it for emptiness. In reality, it is the absence of chronic stress. Jung believed that individuation requires a symbolic death, the death of the role you were assigned: the good child, the peacemaker, the emotional caretaker. Cutting off contact is often this death. It is the collapse of an identity built around meeting others' needs at the expense of your own. Society rarely acknowledges this grief, because there is grief, not just for the family you left, but for the family you never had, the parents who could not see you, the safety that never existed. This grief is complex and private. It cannot be rushed, and it cannot be healed while remaining in the environment that caused the wound. Guilt slowly transforms as understanding grows. It becomes clear that guilt was never proof of wrongdoing. It was evidence of conditioning, a learned response designed to keep you compliant. When this realization settles, a quiet strength emerges. You begin to understand that loyalty to others cannot come before loyalty to yourself. That gratitude does not require continued harm. That love without respect is not love at all. And most importantly, you learn this truth: you are not abandoning your family. You are ending the abandonment of yourself. After the separation, something unsettling happens. The noise fades, but so does the structure. For many people who cut off contact with their families, identity was never something they owned. It was something assigned. Roles were given early and reinforced relentlessly. The responsible one, the quiet one, the achiever, the fixer, the disappointment. When contact ends, those roles lose their audience, and without an audience, they dissolve. This is where the real psychological work begins. At first, the silence feels unnatural. Without constant demands, criticism, or expectations, the mind searches for familiar tension. Many experience restlessness, guilt spikes, even an urge to recreate chaos elsewhere. This is not weakness. It is conditioning. The nervous system was trained to equate dysfunction with normalcy. Calm feels foreign because peace was never practiced. Carl Jung described this phase as the collapse of the persona. The persona is the mask worn to survive social systems. In dysfunctional families, the persona is not optional. It is enforced. You learn quickly who you must be to be tolerated. When that mask falls away, you are left with a terrifying question: who am I without them? This question has no immediate answer, and that uncertainty is deeply uncomfortable. Some try to fill it quickly with new relationships, new identities, new beliefs. Others retreat completely. Both responses are attempts to escape the void, but the void is necessary. It is the psychological space where the authentic self begins to emerge. This emergence is not dramatic. It is quiet and often lonely. Without constant external input, you start noticing your own preferences. What you enjoy without justification. What drains you without explanation. What feels wrong even when no one is watching. These realizations may seem small, but they are revolutionary. For the first time, your inner compass begins to function. However, identity reconstruction is rarely linear. Old voices resurface. Internalized parents criticize you from within. You hear accusations in your own thoughts. You are selfish. You are ungrateful. You are overreacting. These voices are not your own. They are psychological remnants of the system you left. Recognizing this is crucial. Otherwise, you risk recreating the same dynamic internally. Jung warned that what is not made conscious becomes fate. If you do not examine these internal voices, they will govern your decisions. You will sabotage peace because it feels undeserved. You will question your worth in moments of stability. You will confuse self-respect with arrogance. This is the shadow at work. The shadow is not evil. It is wounded. It contains the anger you are never allowed to express, the boundaries you were punished for asserting, the needs that were ignored. When family contact ends, the shadow demands attention. If ignored, it turns inward as shame. If faced, it becomes strength. Facing it means allowing yourself to feel emotions you were taught to suppress. Rage without justification. Grief without apology. Relief without guilt. These emotions do not make you cruel. They make you honest. Suppression kept the system alive. Expression dissolves it. One of the most destabilizing moments occurs when you realize you no longer need permission. No one is monitoring your choices. No one is waiting to approve or disapprove. This freedom can feel paralyzing. Responsibility shifts entirely onto you. There is no one to rebel against anymore. No one to blame. This is adulthood in its purest form. Many mistake this phase for loneliness, but loneliness implies lack. What you are experiencing is solitude. Solitude is the absence of interference. It is the psychological condition required for individuation. Jung believed that only through separation from collective identities can a person become whole. During this period, relationships change. Some friends drift away because you are no longer emotionally available in the same way. Others feel threatened by your boundaries. You may be accused of becoming cold, distant, or different. These accusations are projections. Your growth exposes stagnation in others, and stagnation resents movement. This is why people who cut off family contact often experience a second wave of grief, not for the family itself, but for the realization that many relationships were contingent. They existed because you were predictable, accommodating, self-sacrificing. When those traits disappear, so does the connection. But something else appears. Clarity. You begin to see patterns you could not see before. How often guilt was used to control you. How love was conditional. How silence was safer than honesty. This clarity does not make you bitter. It makes you discerning. And discernment is a form of self-respect. Gradually, identity stabilizes. You stop introducing yourself through roles. You no longer define yourself by who you help or endure. Your worth becomes internal rather than negotiated. This is subtle but profound. You choose relationships based on resonance, not obligation. You rest without explaining. You say no without rehearsing. The most important shift is this: you stop seeking validation for your pain. You no longer need others to agree that what happened was wrong. You know it in your body. That knowing is enough. This does not mean reconciliation is impossible. It means reconciliation is no longer necessary for wholeness. You are complete without resolution. This realization is terrifying to systems built on dependency, but it is liberating to the individual. By the end of this chapter, one truth becomes undeniable. Cutting off contact was not an act of destruction. It was an act of creation. The creation of a self that was never allowed to exist. And once that self is born, it cannot be unlearned. Eventually, a moment arrives when the chaos truly ends. Not because the past is resolved, but because it no longer governs you. The emotional storms that once controlled your nervous system begin to lose their force. You still remember, but the memory no longer dictates your behavior. This is the quiet turning point most people never witness from the outside. It does not announce itself. It simply settles. For those who cut off contact with their families, this stage feels strange because it lacks drama. There is no victory speech, no confrontation scene, no apology that finally makes everything right. Instead, there is an internal stillness. A sense that the fight is over, even though nothing externally changed. This is not indifference. It is completion. At this stage, grief returns one last time, but it comes differently. It is no longer the grief of loss, but the grief of acceptance. You mourn what never existed. The parents you hoped would change. The safety you deserved but never received. The childhood that was cut short by emotional responsibility. This grief is deeper, but cleaner. It does not beg. It releases. Carl Jung believed that true healing requires mourning the unlived life. Not the fantasy of what could have been, but the reality of what was denied. Until this mourning happens, the psyche remains divided. When it does happen, integration begins. Integration means you stop splitting yourself into good and bad, loyal and selfish, strong and weak. You see the full picture. You recognize that cutting off contact was both painful and necessary, that love and harm can coexist, that someone can do their best and still damage you. This maturity dissolves black and white thinking. With integration comes a new relationship to guilt. Guilt no longer controls you, but it may still visit. When it does, you no longer argue with it. You observe it. You understand where it came from. And then you let it pass. Guilt loses its grip when it is no longer obeyed. Another subtle shift occurs. You stop needing to explain your story. You no longer feel compelled to justify your distance or educate others about your family. Silence replaces defense. This silence is not secrecy. It is sovereignty. Your life is no longer a public case study. This is often when respect appears unexpectedly. Not from everyone, but from the right people. They sense your boundaries before you speak them. They do not pry. They do not test. They feel the weight of your presence. This is the paradox. The more private you become, the more solid you feel. At the same time, loneliness may surface again, but now it carries wisdom. You understand that depth narrows the field, that not everyone can walk with you into this level of awareness. This no longer feels tragic. It feels honest. You would rather be alone than emotionally crowded. The most profound change happens in how you relate to yourself. You stop abandoning your own signals. When your body says no, you listen. When exhaustion appears, you rest. When something feels wrong, you trust it without needing proof. This self-trust rebuilds what years of gaslighting destroyed. Eventually, the family you left becomes part of your story, not the center of it. You can reflect without spiraling. You can remember without regressing. The emotional charge dissolves because the lesson has been learned. You no longer need the wound to define you. Some people eventually reconnect. Others never do. Both paths can be valid. The difference now is choice, not obligation, not fear, not guilt. Choice rooted in self-respect. And if reconnection never happens, peace still does. This is when legacy quietly shifts. You stop repeating patterns. You do not pass down silence, guilt, or emotional debt. Whether through children, work, or presence, you embody something different. You become proof that cycles can end without becoming cruel. Jung said that individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. Wholeness includes boundaries. It includes solitude. It includes the courage to disappoint others, to remain loyal to yourself. This courage reshapes your life in ways no external validation ever could. In the end, cutting off contact was not about escape. It was about alignment. About refusing to live a life scripted by unresolved wounds. About choosing consciousness over compliance. This choice does not make you heartless. It makes you free. And freedom, when earned this way, is quiet, grounded, and unshakable. You do not need permission to live in it. If this chapter resonated with you, don't rush away from it. Sit with it. Let it settle. You don't need to explain your story to anyone here. But if you feel ready, write, "I choose clarity" in the comments. Not for me, for yourself. Subscribe if you want more psychology like this. Slow, honest, and grounded. We don't chase noise here. We build quiet strength.